to Ranjani, my colleague, to handle to answer a number of questions that have come up on the technical side. So a couple of questions on sort of the use cases of the application. One question was about using the application for people with visual impairment. There's certainly ability within the app to change through customization and through sort of further development to make the form factor bigger, to make the font sizes bigger, sort of make changes to make the questions look larger for people with visual impairment. So again, it's not something that's there out of the box, but the entire app framework provides that ability to make that customization or changes. Similarly, there was a question about pediatric studies. Again, the apps can be modified with the appropriate requirements to support those kind of studies. Again, it really depends what those requirements are and what customizations would be needed. But the platform does provide basic framework, and within the ResearchKit Research Stack framework, and and those can be customized and enhanced for a number of other use cases. Couple of questions had come up about sensors and how to integrate some of the data that a lot of the phones or majority of the smartphones now provide. Both ResearchKit and to some extent Research Stack, but ResearchKit definitely has a number of active tasks that can be used through the platform. They need to be added and sort of the support for them implemented, but a lot of those active tasks essentially make use of the data collected to the sensors. Not all of those are available on the Research Stack framework, but they can be implemented, and other active tasks can be implemented on the ResearchKit framework on Research Stack for using of that sensor data. And apart from that, there are other external sensors, whether it's physical activity like Fitbit type sensors or medical devices or a number of other devices that provide data that can be potentially integrated within the app. Again, the framework allows that, and it's, as Ranjani was talking earlier, the way we have sort of designed the base architecture should allow for those customizations and enhancements to be incorporated. One question that had come up was about the Apple Watch and the data that is connected to Apple Watch. That data actually goes and sits into HealthKit or Health, as it's called now, and that can be read from Health and used. And there are other watches that expose the data through different mechanisms as well, and so you could potentially use that data if it's not an iOS-based application. One last question that I'm going to tackle, and then I'll give it a hand off to Ranjani, is setting up standalone mode versus gateway mode. This is actually a capability you have in WCP. When you are setting up a study, you can indicate whether you want that study to be standalone, to be in a standalone app, or you want that study to appear as part of a gateway app that you have set up. So it's a fairly easy configuration, and based on that configuration, when the application, the study is either published to a gateway app, or it sort of generates the standalone app code that you can then brand and publish. So naturally, if there are other use case related questions or other functionality related questions, we'll handle those as we go along. But I'm going to pass now to Ranjani to handle some of the technical questions that have come up.
Thanks, Shah. So we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. So the first question I have here is, what are the steps required to rebrand a new app using the source code in the Git repo? So I think I touched on it a little bit, but just to reiterate, so you would need to make a clone or make a copy of the source code for iOS and Android. You can change the app icon. All these are assets that are in the app code base. The app icon, the splash screen, you can also change the tint color, which affects the color that shows up on the buttons and the icons and the screens themselves. You would also need to change the URLs that the mobile app connects to. So your instance of the mobile app for your study would be pointing to the URL to get the study metadata, the user registration server URL, and the response server. So you would need to change these three URLs within your app configuration to point to the right data sources. Build it, test it, deploy it, and you're done. So that, in a nutshell, is what you would need to do. We also have a lot of this outlined in some of our documentation on Git, so please feel free to take a look. The next question we have here is, what happens to questionnaires or other workflows if the participant's entry is interrupted? So if I'm a patient going through a survey in the app, if I get interrupted, the next time I launch the app, it'll resume from the point where I left off, so from my last saved response. So for example, if I went through survey questions 1 to 5, and I was in question 6, but I didn't complete that, when I come back, I would start from question 6 again. So essentially, it handles interruptions by resuming at the point of the last question that you completed or the last task that you completed. The other question, next question we have here is, once the one-time form is filled by the subject and saved, can they still review it later without changing anything? So I'm assuming the one-time form here refers to the form, which is a part of the questions or the survey. So the short answer to this is yes. Once the one-time form is filled, the subject can go back and they can review it, provided it hasn't been submitted to the server. So so from a patient workflow, when I go through all the questions in the survey, it gets submitted to the server. And once it's submitted to the server, the patient cannot go back and review the question. So as long as the question has not been submitted to the server, you can go back and review it later without changing anything. Next question, are reminder notifications possible within the app? The kind of reminders and notifications we support are local reminders, which are kind of like a calendar reminder, and notifications are push notifications that are sent from the server. So these are the two kind of notifications or reminders that are supported within the app. Here's another question. It says, you said that the app supports iOS 12 Swift 5, but the project on GitHub is iOS 9 and Swift 3. How can I get the latest release? So, the project on GitHub does support iOS 12 and Swift 5. We missed updating the README for the iOS, but we will fix that ASAP. But the code that you have out there on Git should support iOS 12 and Swift 5. We just didn't update the README for iOS, so we updated it for the whole project. So please go ahead and use that, and you should be good to go with iOS 12. Here's another question. BP reading from the watch would, here's the question. So has any thought been given to integrating the app with data sources from the user? So for example, if the user has a smartwatch that monitors their BP, in response to a study question, would the user be able to submit the BP reading from their watch? So, and would this be something that can be integrated into the app by the study sponsor? So to some extent, yes. So for example, if they're using an Apple Watch and that watch sends the information to HealthKit, then the integration with HealthKit is already built into the app. So it should be able to pick up the blood pressure reading in this particular example. If there needs to be direct integration with blood pressure, with a different kind of a watch, then there would need to be some additional development or enhancement to the app for that. Next question, does the app allow for fingerprint sign-in after the initial setup? Yes, it does. So there is a Touch ID, and this is supported only on iPhones as of now. So there is a Touch ID that the user can use either passcode or Touch ID to authenticate in the app, authenticate with the app. Another question, is it possible to use the app to capture a photo with the mobile device and upload it? Is that a capturable data item within the questionnaire? So the app currently does not support it. It does not support multimedia-based responses like images, video, or audio. But ResearchKit by itself supports question types that require media responses. So it could be easily built into the app with little effort, but the app doesn't support it as of today. An interesting one here. For longer-term studies, how are the software updates managed on patient phones? So this is an interesting question. So for studies that are longer-term, so if you're looking at software updates, so there are two areas where you probably would have changes. One is, or maybe three. There's a server-side changes, and there would be changes on the app side. As far as server-side changes go, it should be developed, well, it should be designed, built, and developed in such a way that it does not break the mobile app as it is today. So they really should be, from a user perspective, any changes to the server side should be transparent to the user using the mobile app. And when that happens, it is, of course, good practice to make sure there's enough testing around the changes both on the server side and the mobile app side to make sure everything works as expected. If changes need to be made on the mobile app, it could be an enhancement, it could be a security fix, it could be a number of reasons that an app has to be updated. So again, from an app update perspective, it is important to make sure that the app is backward compatible with or the surveys and questions are backward compatible with the version of the app that the user has. So again, it is really a development strategy, to some extent a design strategy, to make sure that the changes always support what happened before and nothing is broken with the update feature. And there could be different ways to enforce updates. So if it's a security patch, you may need to force the user to update the app. If it's not a security patch, the user doesn't have to update the app, but you need to make sure that as a developer or as a study sponsor, your app supports multiple, your app works correctly across the different versions that you have out there. Here's another question. With every update to the questions, do the participants have to re-answer all the questions? The answer to that is within the survey, yes. So if there's a new version of the survey, then, and the user is in the middle of the survey, that is, they haven't submitted the responses yet, and if there's a new version, then they would need to retake the survey for that particular update. As I'm going through my questions here, I think I covered all the major ones. I'm going to hand it off to Adam, who has a list of questions. So thank you.
Okay. Can sponsor monitors and auditors be given view access to the system to monitor audit compliance? So I'll answer from a technical perspective. A study administrator can assign read-only access within their study to any appropriate individual. So pretty simple there. How does the app integrate with data management platforms? I think this was asked before I presented the response server, but just kind of to briefly recap, the response server has direct integration with many data analytics systems, including SAS and R. It includes client libraries for many languages, many programming languages, Python, Java, etc. It provides access via ODBC, standard APIs like ODBC and JDBC. It actually also has an ETL mechanism that I failed to mention in the presentation, but that would be one way to transfer data from the response server into other systems. Is it possible to integrate data from the app going to LabKey with another EDC system? So this is a very interesting question, Laura. I had to think about it for a second. There are several approaches I can think of. Here's one example. So as a clinical trial data management system, LabKey integrates with REDCap, Metadata Rave, DATStat, and other EDC systems. Let's say you're using REDCap as your EDC. One approach you could take is to add the enrollment token to the participant records in REDCap and configure REDCap integration on the response server to sync the EDC data into the study. At that point, you could write queries or reports that join EDC data with responses via the enrollment tokens, or you could retrieve data, all the data combined into the research organization's analytic system and do the joining there. So a couple of possibilities there. How are the response data tables configured in the storage environment? Is there a way to edit or change the tables? So I think I covered this primarily in my response server presentation. I'll just add that technically it's possible for an admin to change the tables, but I really don't recommend it. Since the response server manages those tables, it has expectations about what columns and tables are present, and it's going to try to use those tables to store the responses when they come. And then we had a couple questions in the area of verifying participants and cross-study tracking of participants and dual registration of participants and trying to track that or detect that. So as you heard in the presentations, we were very deliberate about keeping participant information, participant identifiers, out of the response server. They reside in the registration server, but not in the response server. So by just looking at the response server, you can't really do any cross-referencing or any detection that a participant is in multiple studies or multiply enrolled in the same study. However, a research organization that's authorized to query both the user registration server and the response server could query both of those servers and join the data based on the enrollment token to see, for instance, the email addresses of each of these participants and make determinations of dual enrollment or cross-study enrollment based on that. And that's it.
Thanks, Adam. This is Zach, and I have a few more questions to answer. First, we were asked, where is the informed consent form stored, and how does a participant get a copy of that? The informed consent is stored on the registration server, so it can be accessed by study administrators and researchers, and that registration server is partitioned by study folder, so consent forms for a particular study are only accessible by users who have access to that folder on the registration server. Within the mobile app, it's accessible from the consent section in the resources section of the mobile app. So in that way, it's accessible to both the patient and to the researcher or study administrators. A question about the study being in draft. While the study is in draft, would this give someone, such as a quality assurance person, the ability to review the study before it is published? The answer is yes. in the WCP before a study is actually published to a mobile app. It is reviewable by anybody who has permission to view that study. The WCP, like the other elements, has role-based access, so a QA person could be given read-only access to review the questions and other elements configured for that particular study to make sure it's good to go before publishing. The final question I want to address is actually related to a new feature that has been released to the GitHub as of today. It was, is there a way to set a specific schedule for the patient based on the date they enrolled in the study? And the answer to that is yes. So we understand many studies and trials might have rolling enrollment and need to present surveys to participants based on the date of an individual's enrollment, not based on a particular calendar date. So that feature is now possible. What that means, for example, Zach, enroll in a study today on Thursday, and I will then get a weekly survey every Thursday. Somebody who enrolls tomorrow, Friday, would get the same weekly survey every Friday, and so on. So that is available as of today. And now I'll turn it over to David Martin for a few more questions.
Okay, so we also received some questions about pediatric-specific issues and questions about whether pediatric assent could be attained through the app. So just by way of background, in the U.S., children cannot legally provide informed consent. You must be age 18 to provide informed consent. However, IRBs will often require pediatric assent. And pediatric assent is based on an ongoing conversation with the study team. It's interactive and it often involves multiple visits. In addition, typically both parents are giving permission for the child to be part of a clinical trial. So this is a type of situation where I think we would recommend a face-to-face consent and assent process, but the app could still support the study. And, you know, we look forward to seeing what the community may ultimately develop. There may be people with additional visual design ideas, age-appropriate questionnaire content, gamification features that may eventually become part of other iterations of this app. We were also asked, there's various versions of this question, but sort of what is the best method to measure digital health outcomes for specific labeling claims in a specific therapeutic area? And I would say that while the app and the MyStudies system as a whole is a tool, as you have seen, that can enable these activities, sponsors interested in U.S. licensure or U.S. approval so labeling claims are encouraged to engage the appropriate division in the therapeutic area at FDA before planning a study of any kind, including one that contains digital health outcomes. I was also asked about costs. Is there cost associated with using this system? So obviously the open source code and technical documentation save you a lot of development time, and they also provide you a roadmap, whether you use the individuals involved in this or other individuals to work with to try to implement. In very specific sense, thinking about costs, there are the costs associated with your base study or your base real-world data sources, which are part of the whole package. And then in terms of deployment of the app system, there would be application fees to the app stores as well as paying for hosting. So those are just some big bucket things to think about as you think about costs. So now I'll just transition into the very last part of the webinar, which is some closing thoughts and resources. And I was asked, and I know we've had some people joining the webinar as the day has gone on, I was asked if the FDA could share why this initiative is important to introduce to industry. And, at the beginning I mentioned that in the U.S., more adults own smartphones than own computers, and 1 in 5 U.S. adults is smartphone dependent. And furthermore, smartphone dependency, which means they've essentially cut the cord on any other kind of internet service provision at home, is more frequent among non-whites as well as people under 50 and people with lower income deciles. We've also seen in our demonstration projects that the patient convenience is there. I mean, people are answering questions in the app at all hours of the day, and they're doing it in very small snippets, like, I've got 5 minutes, I can answer some questions. We also on purpose tried to make these things short so they're doable. So again, here are the key system attributes. As we've mentioned all day, you know, it's scalable to support multiple studies for a research organization. It's modular, which supports changes to the app. It's secure. The whole system is secure with appropriate partitions and robust access controls. We've deployed it in a compliant manner, and you can too, following our roadmap. There's the whole customizable feature to support multiple therapeutic areas or types of studies. We have tested this in a clinical environment, and of course it's open source. And that leads me to essentially the call to action to you. And I would say, number one, we would like you to review the code in the GitHub repository and ask questions, clone, build, and test the code in your development environment. And while, as I said in my first disclaimer, I can't endorse specific commercial entities, the individuals who have been involved in working on this have provided their emails to serve as resources. And of course, in line with that disclaimer, you are perfectly within your rights to take all of this open source code and technical documentation and deploy the system yourself with your own hosting environment. I had one last question, which is, what is the overall vision for the MyStudies open source project in terms of building a community around it? And I would like to say, I think the massive volume of questions that we've gotten today, and we apologize that we definitely will not be able to get through them all, but we will try to eventually think of a way to follow up on this, is evidence that we need to nurture this community. I've had support now from the leadership of the Center for Drugs and new support from the Office of the Commissioner to grow and build this community. So I would say, number one, please stay tuned. And we will be reaching out to you through standard FDA methods as a fail-safe if you want to follow and know when something else is happening with this. My Twitter handle is @Martin_Dave, and that's sort of a fail-safe way that you'll find out if something's going to be going on new in this way, or you could reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll message on that. So hopefully one way or the other you will hear after we've taken this under advisement and worked on new ways that we can support this and keep this moving forward. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Brenda. Thank you very much, David. Thank you to all our wonderful presenters for your very informative and timely talk, and for that outstanding job that you gave in all the Q&A sessions. David is not exaggerating when he said we had hundreds of questions come in to us. If you did not get your question answered and you would like to follow up, please send it again to that email account on the current slide, CDER SBIA@sba.hhs.gov, and we will do our best to get you an answer in a timely fashion. Just a couple reminders before we close for the day, and thank you for hanging in there with us. This activity is eligible for continuing education credits by RAPS, SQA, and ACRP. You will be able to obtain the attendance certificate only upon completion of the survey, which the link is right there. Click for the evaluation and certificate. Please provide us your comments for future improvement. And to build on what David was saying, we will also be sending out messages pertinent to this material. So go ahead and sign up for our listserv on our website as well. Again, the link is there on this last website, on this last slide. So on behalf of CDER Small Business and Industry Assistance, we hope that you enjoyed today's presentation, found it helpful. We look forward to your presence at future webinars, which will be advertised through our listserv and also on our website. Thank you very much to everyone.